Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. I just want to say that again. I'm Laura Heritage. I'm a principal solution architect for enterprise API platforms. I have been working with customers all over the world for the past 10 years, establishing SOA and API strategies. And today I'm going to share my experiences on the API adoption patterns. I thought of this talk just a few weeks ago when I was in the API Strategy and Practice conference in Amsterdam, which is a great conference. If you have a chance to go to that conference, it's a wonderful conference, and you should go. And I was on a panel, and they asked me my views on an enterprise API panel, my views on the adoption of APIs, and that's how this talk came about, because there's some patterns emerging. So let's move on to the next slide here. You know, there's so much hype about the API economy and the explosion of APIs and the promises that APIs bring when opening up your business, and how having and not having an API today is not having like a website in the 90s. But what are enterprises really doing in this space is a common question I get asked. Even just a few months ago, I've talked to enterprises who say they're just not ready. They're just not mature enough to go to that completely open, you know, API economy, external developer driving innovation type of experience with their APIs. Or they'll say that their business is just not there, or it's not part of their business, and so forth. So there's a lot of they see it's out there, they understand it, but it's a maturity and you know, a little apprehension of the API economy in its space. So when we think about, you know, how are these enterprises adopting APIs, it really depends on which industry you're in. The adoption and maturity and the necessity for you to be the first people out with an external API really plays a large role. But in general, what I'm seeing from an enterprise perspective are these four adoption patterns. And it's really the iceberg type of scenario where just the tip are exposing APIs for external innovation. A majority are starting with supporting APIs for mobile, internal, and partner initiatives, at least initially, and then we'll expand outward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover, go into each one of these patterns and explain the drivers and the benefits and what type of APIs that each one, what they look like in each one of these scenarios. So the first scenario I really want to focus on is obviously the largest of the scenarios, and that's internal API adoption. And when I look at the customers that are, you know, focusing on internal API adoption, these are very common scenarios. One, APIs within line of business. Two, APIs moving across lines of business, driving reuse. One very exciting and I'm going to try to stop myself from talking too much about it now, is how enterprises are consuming third-party APIs. So not being an enterprise being a provider of the APIs, but actually consumers of the APIs. And then the fourth adoption is really those companies that are focusing on acquisitions and provide a lot of acquisitions, helping to simplify that scenario. So let's move on and talk about internal API adoption within lines of within a line of business. Most enterprises do not get a clean slate to start from. Okay, we all know that. The lucky ones have a well-defined SOA initiative, or at least a good understanding of the SOA principles and practices from which they can extend and push out from those enterprise, you know, those APIs and push out. But a large majority, and I've been in this space a long time, I would say 10 years I've been doing SOA and API management. But a large majority of enterprises have to contend with hundreds of not well-designed services and different infrastructures, and they have to move on from there. So that's a part of it. And a lot of those customers that say, well, we're not even, we haven't even done SOA well because we've got all these not well-defined services, they're starting from that point, and they feel that and they need to get a control over that before they can extend outward and show, show their outsides, their insides to the outside. Okay, it's in this segment, in this group of folks and enterprises that I talk to, where that whole notion of, SOA versus APIs discussions come up, or services versus an API debate come up. And I think now, after 3-4 years of this debate, I think the debate is settling down, and the realization that APIs are really an extension of SOA, that the in order to be successful at this and be able to function, that the service management and API management solutions that companies employ to help them should converge, right? So a software solution is one of those solutions that is truly converged from day one. So if you're this line of business and you've got services, atomic services that you need to manage, then you can easily do that and then extend out from a SOA perspective. But this is all I'm going to say through this whole presentation on the whole SOA API discussions. There are several different presentations from SOA Software and other vendors around that debate, and we can take that debate on if there's still left of a debate offline. So when we take a look and focus specifically on this whole notion of APIs within lines, within a particular line of business, let's see what do those APIs, what does it look like? Well, these APIs tend to be private. They're APIs or services. They tend to be private, mostly atomic. You know who the consumer of the API is, and it's usually a manual consumption. It's usually a point-to-point consumption, not in all cases, but that's what they tend to look like in this internal APIs with line of business. The reason why they still, even in this point-to-point world, why they want to leverage APIs and services is obviously to create that flexibility in their architecture so that they can change and so that they can innovate going forward. And it proves it improves the team's ability to respond to changes, to respond to new systems, and be flexible. Now, when we take a look, the questions when I talk to particular line of businesses that still come up, that have come up from a SOA perspective is, okay, except now we've got an additive APIs, how do I build the right level of service or APIs? And does the service, do you have to have a service then to expose the API? Those topics of conversation always come up, and it's from a design time perspective. The next one is, how do you manage your atomic services and the APIs you produce and consume within your line of business? Okay, if it is truly a point-to-point consumption, right, from one application to another application, do you need to put another layer in there to isolate those layers? That is a question that often comes up, and I think the answer is it depends. Then they're like, well, how do you plan for growth? How do you innovate? How do you protect the data with that those APIs are and services within your line of businesses are exposing? And are you going to look to expose those, start from this, one line of business? Are you going to look to extend outside your line of business to cross other lines of businesses? Which gets us into the next, pattern, is moving from that siloed line of business management of those APIs and services to really going out to a larger enterprise view and having APIs across your lines of businesses. This is where the promise of SOA, right, is being realized through APIs. You know, having that whole reuse of SOA that, you know, SOA got there, but it, you know, it kind of hit a wall, and APIs really have allowed us to push through that and really get the value out of that SOA. So APIs are making it easier to consume across lines of businesses. The API management platforms that are in the market today can help make this consumption even easier. But not only that, it helps socializing what different lines of businesses have available and the quality of that API. I think that was one of the resistance from leveraging other SOA services, that we never got the visibility of the quality and that communication, socialization between the lines of businesses working and trusting each other and what they're doing. I think also there's been a shift not of that whole not invented here syndrome as well. I think with this whole notion of what's happening outside the enterprise about reusing, extending, has really helped inside an enterprise. It is now cool to use reuse somebody else's service and invent on top of it instead of having that whole notion, well, I don't trust how they implemented it. Type of thing. And again, those API platforms, management platforms, help, you know, ensure quality and get people to trust in order to reuse that. So when we look at APIs across lines of businesses, they still tend to be private APIs, right? You still know who the consumers are, but it's from a self-service consumption standpoint. It's no longer, you know, calling up on the phone and trying to find the person that owns the API. It becomes a lot easier. There does become a business relationship between cross lines of businesses, and data can still be highly sensitive. And so you have to, you know, worry about the quality and do they meet, you know, your security standards for how they're going to use those. Now, the benefit of this is, you know, the increased adoption rate of shared resources, right? We're all short on resources. It seems worse and worse every year. But the APIs have really increased, like I said, the ability of those adoption rate of those shared resources. It gives your customers a consistent experience across your lines of business. You know, for example, on the right, I have it's a bank example, right, where you have a large financial institution that has a banking arm, an investment arm, and a credit card arm, and a lending arm. And if you're a customer and you have business in all arms of that bank, you expect a consistent experience across that whole banking experience. And APIs are freeing us up and allowing us to give customers that unified experience across the lines of businesses. And it improves the enterprise's ability to grow and change. Now, some of the questions and the concerns that you have to think about is, well, okay, how do you manage the APIs you consume from other lines of businesses? How do you manage the APIs you provide to other lines of businesses? API platforms help you, but there's also some non-technical issues and policies and things that you need to set up and what your terms of use is going to be. How are you going to enforce the quality and standards that are required by the different lines of businesses? And how do you manage the consumption, well, I said that, how do you manage the consumption of your APIs by other lines of businesses, and how within a particular line of businesses where you're you're controlled and governed and have to meet some data privacy acts, how do you control and make sure the other, the consumers of your APIs are complying with those data privacy. So these are all things that you need to start to consider as you move and start sharing your APIs across the different lines of business. Okay. So that's the pattern of APIs across lines of business. Now, each one of these patterns, we can go even into more detail, but today we just don't have enough time to go into that amount of detail, so we hope to have some more sessions later to go into detail around how to implement some of these patterns. Today is just an introductory to these patterns. Now, one of the very interesting patterns that is coming up and that is causing challenges within enterprises are the consumption of third-party APIs. You know, these are public APIs. There is a business relationship that is going on between your company and a third-party company. It could have been self-service. It could have been a developer within your organization that just put in a credit card and began using this particular API. The procurement's typically wide open. The reason to use these third-party APIs, well, quite obvious. It fulfills a capability you do not provide internally, gives you faster time to market, maybe adds a new service for your particular customers that your customers need. But it brings up very interesting things. How do you know which third-party APIs are being used within your organization and company? Do you have control over which APIs are being used? How are you procuring them? Like I said, are you letting employees enter their corporate credit cards? Are you going through your corporate procurement systems? How do you manage the relationships of the APIs with you consume, right? Are you sharing data with them? Are they PCI compliant? These are things that you have to start thinking about when you're consuming third-party APIs. Another thing that you have to start thinking about, let's say you have a deal with a third party for how much of that API you can consume, okay? But you have several different lines of businesses within your organization, within your enterprise that wants to use that API, but you have that one contract. How do you manage that? How do you divvy up how many transactions or how much data volume each one of these different lines of businesses are consuming? And can you do that technically? Right? Yeah, you can. You can use an API management system to help you control that within your organization. It's a very interesting paradigm and governance issue that enterprises are going to have to pay a lot more attention to in the next few years. Finally, from an internal API management standpoint, is simplifying acquisitions. I get this one all the time when I'm talking with enterprises that are very large, and especially enterprises that do a lot of acquisitions. These APIs that they put around their base systems in order to make the acquisition systems integrate easier. They tend to be private APIs. There is a business relationship here when you're connecting, even though it's within the same organization, you're connecting two very, most often customer-centric systems, and so you've got customer experience and so forth that you have to think about. The relationships tend to be a pretty manual relationship, hooking those systems up. Again, the purpose to streamline acquisitions. There are things that you need to consider once you set this API up. For example, how long does a system stay in acquisition mode? Is this going to be running like this forever? Is there a retirement plan going on? And so forth. So there's a bunch of like non-technical things, governance things that you need to think about around the APIs. But again, the APIs help ease that whole notion of that acquisition. Okay. Now let's move on to mobile. Okay. Every mobile strategy should have APIs at its base. I went to Apps World out in San Francisco last fall, and every single mobile topic seemed to revolve more around APIs. And in fact, I was at this one, I was listening to this one from an enterprise app perspective, and the audience up to the panel was, how do you get funding to build your first mobile app? And one of the executives on the board stood up and says, well, that's not really the question. The question should be, how do you get funding for your second, third, and fourth mobile app? Because the first one is pretty easy to get funding for. It's typically an expensive endeavor, and so you need to do it right? And he says the best way to do it is to establish an API platform, API strategy, and security strategy right off the bat, because more than likely, you're not going to get your mobile app exactly correct, and you're going to have to make changes. Those changes that you're going to have to make are going to be a lot cheaper to make if you built on top of an API platform. And because of that, you'll have success. You'll be able to more easily get the funding for your second, third, and fourth mobile app. Okay? So every mobile strategy should have an API at its base. The types of APIs here are typically, they can be private and they can be public, right? The relationship, the business relationship, can be both manual and it can be an automatic, depending on how you want to set it up, depending on who's your audience is. Now, people use these APIs to increase flexibility in the mobile strategy, just like the scenario that I talked about earlier. But what I'm seeing, and it lowers the cost of your mobile strategy. One of the things that I'm seeing at multiple enterprises is because when you're building a mobile strategy, you have to build a mobile app for several different types of devices. And most of the enterprises I talk to do not have the skilled mobile resources that they need to build apps for all of these different devices and so forth. So what they do is they establish a API platform. They might do one or two mobile app developments in-house, but they are actually outsourcing to third-party mobile development companies in order to build the best experiences for all of their different needs. So it helps lower the development efforts in your mobile strategy. Another reason they provide, have the APIs at the base of a mobile strategy is to provide a consistent experience across both mobile, web, and applications, so that when you have the experiences within your enterprise and what your employees see, how your employees work, is the same experience as they see on the outside from a consumer experience. So with this, there are challenges when you think about mobile and APIs, and a lot of them are the same as the ones that we talked about before in the internal scenario. For example, how are you going to secure the APIs and the apps? Are you going to have a mobile gateway and an API gateway? Are they the same? How are you going to onboard your developers, both the internal developers that might be using APIs to develop mobile apps for your employees or mobile apps for external, plus your third-party mobile app developers? I mean, those third-party mobile app developers could be developing internal apps for your employees to use, and they can be developing external apps. And as, and I didn't mention versioning in the previous sections, but versioning of your APIs and apps become critical across all, no matter what your adoption pattern or your audience is or why you're building APIs. Okay. So let's move on. And mobile, besides internal adoption, mobile APIs for mobile is a very large player in the API space today. A lot of, and in some instances, are the first step of adopting APIs within an enterprise. The next most popular from an external standpoint, moving outside the enterprise, is partner adoption. And there's the reasons for enterprise adopting APIs for partner adoption is for many different factors. I just highlighted a few of them. One, faster connections, right? They can onboard existing or new partners very rapidly. Some are purely, they might have existing APIs, but in a more traditional, SOAP-based or file transfer-based system, but now they have to upgrade and become relevant as their competitors are becoming more cool and using the cool RESTful way. Working with a large airline and some travel agencies, and retailers, they're leveraging APIs so they can control their content better and improve their customer experiences, because some strategic partners are screen scraping their websites, which they can get some information wrong by the screen scraping approach and caching approach. So that's why if they put out APIs to those folks, everybody can have a better experience and increased revenue. And some are embarking on API strategies because their partners are demanding it. Do it or we'll take our business elsewhere. So if we take a look at what partner APIs look like, they tend to be private APIs. You have a known consumer, they're self-service consumption, or a low-touch consumption where you can automate the handshakes and the agreements with different API management systems out there today. There's definitely a business relationship growing. As I said before, it gives them faster connection to partners, growth of their partner in ecosystem, improvement in partner and customer experiences through leveraging these APIs. The challenges here, similar to all the other patterns. How do you quickly onboard those partners? How do you manage the terms and conditions with each of the different partners? How do you scope the APIs per partners? As you can tell, as we get further, outside the enterprise, the more businessy, the more challenge that you have, determining scoping and how much people should see. Do you need to certify an app when it's built in order to move it to a production, to actually hit the production API endpoint? Do you need to provide sandboxing environments for your partners to hit? Most likely, yes, that you'll need to do that depending on the type of data and the different types of transactions that they're going to be doing against your systems. And so partner connections, again, I would say is one of the largest growth areas and adoption patterns in the API space. Finally, we're going to come to external innovation, this whole reaching that long-tail developer, having those public APIs and not really, knowing who that consumer is, really self-service consumption, because you're trying to get those, what I call the college kid in the dorm room with a Mountain Dew and a great idea for the next mobile app, or even a 11-year-old. My son loves to play with APIs and stuff with his gamings. So you just never know where the business is coming, and that's the promise of this whole API economy and externalizing your business, capitalizing on all these new channels. There's a business relationship there that evolves. You do this, you put out external APIs to drive innovation, to establish yourself as your company as a platform, again, to increase your partner ecosystem even further, and provide or increase your revenue. Very basic stuff. And as you have all the same technical concerns that we had before, right, with security and so forth, versioning of the APIs and all that kind of stuff. But now, and scoping, how much of your resource do you expose and for your business and so forth. But now you're getting into, well, how are you going to monetize? Is this a direct or indirect revenue type of scenario around this API? How are you going to drive adoption? How are you going to do onboarding? How are you going to secure and protect your back end, all that kind of stuff. So there's different sets of questions, and it gets more businessy as you go, the further out external that you go. All right, so we've introduced all of the adoption patterns, okay? So what's the business impact of the adoption patterns? I got to give kudos to Andreas Krohn. He is one of the founders of Nordic APIs, and at API Strategy and Practice, we are sitting in the back of a session, and we got discussing about this whole business impact of adopting these different patterns. Where will businesses see the most value of APIs? And so he came up with this matrix, which I stole and am giving him credit for here. You should, Nordic's APIs conferences are great conferences. They focus around the business of APIs, and I believe another series of conferences are going to be in October, so you might want to go check that out and visit or contact Andreas. So here's the business impact, okay? You start out with, that whole private, custom, with inline of business. I kind of went through this. The relationship is business relationship is manual. It's internal with yourself. The fulfillment, how you actually get the API and begin using it, is typically manual. The potential business impact, he has it down as none, but I would say it is, people would perceive it to be maybe a medium. And in reality, the business impact on those point-to-point things is probably low. I wouldn't say none, but probably low. Okay, and maybe that's why in the end he chose to put none. Now, as we go across and move outward, that whole private self-serve across line of business, using them for mobile, where the business relationship becomes more automatic, right, where you can do more self-serve, use the APIs. The fulfillment becomes more automatic. You can go to an internal developer portal, sign up, accept the terms and conditions, and start going with the API right away. The potential impact that is perceived or that is touted is very high. Or high here for big companies. The realistic business impact, like the immediate business impact, is potentially probably around medium, okay? Because there's always the hype, and then there's the realistic, okay? And so we're being very realistic here. It's probably about medium. You're going to have a range in there. Now, moving on to partner, using APIs for partners. The business relationship is more manual. These are known partners, and there might be some automatic in there, but it's a more manual type of business relationship. The fulfillment of them, retrieving of those APIs can be automatic, pretty automatically get the APIs. The potential business impact here is again high, right? That you'll make that adopting an API platform is going to have a high impact on your business. And what we're actually seeing in the market, it is a high impact. So partner API strategies definitely has a high impact on return on investment for your company, okay? Now we're going to go out to the public APIs, okay? Business relationship, automatic, right? Developer portal, subscribe, key, off, you're running, automatically fulfillment. The height API economy value of this, and I'm responsible for that too, is very high. I think the potential is very, very high out there. However, in the next 14 months, the realistic business impact for some businesses is going to be average around medium. And it really depends on what industry that you're in, what your impact is going to be. So setting a realistic business impact, I would say, of those public APIs is going to be medium until we figure out and get it right. We're still in that playing field of how do we get it right? How do we capitalize on that innovation? Okay. So the Internet of Things. We've had several talks at several conferences about, the Internet of Things. It's an emerging API adoption pattern. Some enterprises, depending on where you are more advanced in this Internet of Things than others. You can't spell Internet of Things without APIs. If you're, for example, if you're a wearables company and you do not have an API, you're creating a silo and you're not really participating in the Internet of Things. And when you think about the Internet of Things, these Internet of Things and wearables connect to one or more APIs. The value of the Internet of Things is the sharing of data and the controlled sharing of data, user data. Now, when you think about the Internet of Things, there's two types of interactions. There's synchronous interactions and real-time interactions, and there's going to be challenges across that you're going to need to address when working with these challenges. But APIs can be used to abstract some of these challenges. Some of these challenges are going to be protocol challenges as well, MQTT and some of the other protocols for which, these machine-to-machine technologies need to use because of bandwidth and so forth. But some of this can be abstracted by APIs, such as authentication, authorization, delegation, access, how you display bandwidth and your bandwidth and display restrictions, different monitoring analytics, stream data slimming and aggregation and data sharing. So this is a space that is going to emerge, and this is an adoption pattern that is going to be, I would say, in the next 6 to 12 months is going to be fulfilled out and become just as mature as the previous adoption patterns that I just talked about. So with all of these adoption patterns, APIs have life cycles. You go from the plan state for understanding and planning what this API is going to do. For example, if it is going to be internal, partner, private, mobile, so forth, if it's going to be external, the monetary aspects behind it, what it's going to do, to where you build it, where you run it, where you share and drive adoption on developer portals, and then analyze it and fill back and continue with that API lifecycle. And that's kind of the high-level lifecycle that the APIs run through. So when we take a look at that, then you need to build a reference architecture for your API strategy. It kind of looks like this. This is how you segment it, where you build and plan, deal with your life cycle management of the API. Okay, how you're going to manage the whole process from the concept of that API all the way through to the realization running of that API, which executes on a gateway that's controlled by a gateway to that sharing and analyzing and developer portal experience. So when you think about, and API platforms, right, typically provide the end-to-end, should provide end-to-end capabilities that I just talked about, from that whole plan all the way through that analyze state. And so when you look for API platform capabilities, you got to think about it in these terms, right? So you have your platform capabilities that deal with licensing, quota management, partner management, being PCI compliant, provisioning, policy management, monitoring, and so forth, through lifecycle management, really managing that lifecycle of both services. Remember when I talked at the beginning about that whole debate between, services and API, SOA and API, and how those things are converging? They really do need to converge on a lifecycle experience and being able to manage within the same system the life cycles of the service and then eventually the API that exposes them out across the lines of businesses. management of the applications and the users and the different compliance that each service and API must uphold in any integrations that occur. Your gateway needs to provide, the security and authentication and protection against attacks, especially if you're going out from a partner perspective to anything outside, from a mobile partner, external application developer, integration with your identity management systems, encryption, mediation, quality of service, orchestration, and all those type of things that you might need to do to finesse your services, to finesse your APIs, to protect them, to get them outside either your line of business or your enterprise. And then I think one of the most important parts is that whole developer, the portal or API portal experience, right? Because remember when I was talking about, well, why are APIs being adopted in an enterprise so much is, well, it's that whole not invented here syndrome. You have to get past that invented here syndrome, and developer portals help you because, one, people can find that the APIs exist. Two, they can see that the API is of quality and it's being used and it has statistics and it meets certain security and regulation criteria and so forth. And thirdly, it provides that socialization so they can communicate with other people, other organizations that are using that APIs. It provides a mechanism to actually talk to the developers, and so you don't have to worry about somebody leaving company and the information going with them because it stays within that social community. So an API platform needs to provide all of these different capabilities across all of the throughout the whole life cycle, give that whole end-to-end life cycle perspective. And so here's my product pitch. I swear I only have 2 slides on that product pitch. SOA Software, and one of the reasons why I joined SOA Software through all my years of doing SOA governance and API management, I chose SOA Software because it best fits what enterprises are looking for from that end-to-end perspective and what they need, giving them the life cycle management of both services and APIs, giving them a powerful gateway. If you have an existing data power gateway, being able to leverage that existing investment, which is very important for customers. And then finally, the whole community management and developer portal perspective. And so we provide that whole end-to-end capabilities. This kind of gets back, going on to the flexible deployment model, this gets back to what I was talking about earlier, where I'm really just introducing you to the different API adoption patterns out there. Companies might adopt 2 or 3 of these patterns at the same time, or they might just stay with one. And depending on how you adopt a particular API pattern, depends, that's how you choose which deployment model that you're going to have. For example, if you are going for that, if you've got a particular business reason, you've got a small group, a small set of APIs that you're putting out, and from a marketing perspective, and it's completely external data, a SaaS solution is probably what you need to get started. If you're doing internal API management with, very sensitive data, you're probably going to want an on-premise solution, a fully on-premise solution to protect your data, right, and to help you grow. Just because it's on-premise, it gives you the full capabilities of going outside the enterprise and inside the enterprise. If you've got needs of both, you want to get started quickly, but yet you'll eventually have an internal API strategy, you might want to try a hybrid model. I think the hybrid model is going to be, from an enterprise perspective, is going to be one of the most commonly adopted models. So you're going to have some portion of the capabilities out in a SaaS model, and where other capabilities are going to be, and other APIs are going to be purely on an on-premise model. I see that one as one of the most highly adopted models going today at this rate. With that, I'm gonna open it up for questions in a minute, but we have a wealth of resources on API and SOA. You can get that at resources.soa.com. We will put the webinar recordings on, you can see the address there, which you can take down. You should be able to find it under resources under the top name. We have a Facebook page, LinkedIn page, and actually, and it's not on here, but all of our presentations are available on SlideShare as well. So just when you're in SlideShare, just query SOA software, and you should find our platform, our questions there. All right, so now I'm going to try to go and look at what questions we have in the, it's got a lot of questions, and I got to try to get this thing to work so I can see it. So one of them, will the slides be available after the presentation? Yes, and a replay will be available. We'll post these to SlideShare. So one of the questions are, what are the benefits of a API gateway or management, what are the benefits of an API gateway or management platform? Are there prerequisites for choosing to go with one versus build some or all of the layer in-house versus build by? There's a lot of benefits of going with the API platform. All of the security considerations that you have to do, all of the developer portal and socialization aspects and features that you have to build and put together and stitch together. Just the whole notion around, okay, provisioning and creating API keys and secrets and onboarding developers, that whole process is quite an extensive process. And in fact, some of the early pioneers in the API space that have well-defined API strategies and solutions out on the market, when they went live, there wasn't an API platform available, so they had to build it. But now they're coming to SOA Software and other API management vendors and saying, you know what, we're not in the business of building and maintaining an API platform. We're in the business of exposing APIs and building our business. So they're pulling out their platforms that they built themselves and putting in API management platforms so that they can concentrate and not have to worry about keeping together a homegrown, fragile infrastructure. So the question, here's a good question, and which is the right place to develop APIs for legacy systems? Develop them in the ESB and expose through an ESB, or develop in Java and expose through the ESB? I'm going to have to say the question really depends on what you're doing and what the legacy system is and what your plans for the future are. But that question comes up a lot. And so I would be happy to discuss with you if you want to contact me privately about your particular situation on whether to develop in the ESB or to develop in Java and expose through the ESB. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to. They just keep coming in, and I can't control them here. Oh shoot. All right. Sorry, every time I try to read one, here's a question. Does your Lifecycle Manager software work with other API gateways? Yes, it does. We work with, the Lifecycle Manager provides can govern a heterogeneous environment. We provide capabilities for that you can use WebSphere Data Power as the API gateway. We provide our own gateway, and we have capabilities for Microsoft platforms. Another question I have is, will SOA software adopt RAML? I am working closely with the folks from MuleSoft and Kinlane, and on the RAML specification, we think both RAML and Swagger are important, and so you'll see a lot more from us shortly on RAML and Swagger. Okay, here's a good question. The convergence of SOA management and API management. The API gateway is usually in the DMZ. SOA platforms, ESB, is usually internal. So how does it converge? I would not necessarily say that the API gateway is in the DMZ. So to say, when you're inside an enterprise, the API gateway can be internal inside the enterprise boundaries, and you usually use an API gateway between boundaries, between different lines of business and so forth. So you typically have that happen in an enterprise. So API gateways are not just for a DMZ. They can be between lines, they can be between boundaries within an enterprise as well, in order to control and gate the solution. Now, some of the API gateways can, the API gateway has some ESB capabilities as well. So the question is, well, depending on what you're doing with your ESB, do you need both an ESB and the API gateway? It really depends on your particular organization. So there's a question of, is investment in a middleware, sorry, I just lost it because it just came. Is investment in a middleware technology a prerequisite for an API SOA platform? I don't think it's a prerequisite for an API SOA program, but it really helps and enable it as an enabler to it, so that you don't have, there's just some fundamental key things that you need to be able to do when you put in a SOA program, that it just makes it easier and frees you up to do other things that's important for your SOA and API platform. Okay. Okay. Let me see. I can take one more. Yeah, there's a lot of questions here about where would you place an API platform in comparison with an ESB. Typically, we see the ESB, more closer to the systems of record, and the API platform, the ESB exposes, could eventually build the API that which the API management platform is going to expose out to the different lines of businesses and to be consumed. That being said, an API platform does have some, a gateway does have some ESB capabilities. So depending on what you're using your ESB for, do you need both? It just depends. Okay. All right. that was my last one. All the other questions that that didn't get answered, what I'm going to do is, because there's a lot of them here, and I can't, they're kind of scrolling here. I'm going to try to, I'll create a blog, and I'll answer them and repost them back with this webcast, and then you'll have those answers. Feel free to email me directly or contact anyone from SOA Software, and I'd be happy to answer any more of your questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody coming to listen to me talk, and I would love to understand every one of your API initiatives, so just give me a call. Thank you.